this is Isaac from Hunger Smash Fitness. I just wanted to make a video today. I've noticed that a lot of people talk about changing your stance to get better or worse muscle activation, especially during the squat. Squat is what I'm going to focus on today. So I've heard some people say that by doing a narrow squat stance versus a wide squat stance, you can change your quad activation or your hamstring activation. And for a long time, I was like, there might be a little bit that goes into that. I think I would agree to an extent, basically, with how that goes. But I decided to, since I love researching stuff, and that's been my new hobby is looking things up. I decided I might as well look up and see if there's been any studies that have been done on muscle activation, specifically during the squat and specifically during a wide stance versus a narrow stance. And I found a couple different studies. Some of them I felt like it would be harder to discuss, harder to explain in depth, but this one in particular I thought was pretty straightforward and very easy to dissect the knowledge here. So basically they took 9 individuals, so it wasn't a very large test at all, but they wanted 9 individuals that were all experienced lifters, and then they measured their 1 rep max, 1 RM, had everybody work up to that, figure out where everyone was, and then for a high load test, they would do 75% of that, and for a low load, they would do 60% of that. So we can get into all that, but so they would check both the high load and the low load, and then they would check a wide stance and a narrow stance. And the wide stance, hip width is 100%, and so wide stance is 140%, so just outside hip width, and then narrow stance they defined as 75%, so it would be narrower than not hip width, shoulder width. So wide stance was 140% of shoulder width, narrow stance was 75% of shoulder width. They don't really talk a lot about foot positioning. They said that each subject was allowed to maintain the most comfortable foot position during this, which I think is important because just to protect the ankles and knees and everything, I think it is important to make sure that you are maintaining the proper foot position for your body type. So I thought that was an interesting one. But anyway, so they had them set like that, and then let me see. So they ended up looking at 6 different muscles. Where does it list them? Vastus medialis, rectus femoris, gluteus maximus, adductor longus, vastus lateralis, and biceps femoris, which is a hamstring, not your biceps brachii on your arm. So biceps femoris is part of your hamstring in the back of your leg. So they're looking at 6 muscles in the leg. And the thing that I thought was really interesting is that almost all of these muscles in each test, in the narrow, regular, and wide stance, read extremely similarly across. So they tested it in high load, low load, and then they tested the descent and the ascent. So for instance, right here I have the rectus femoris pulled up. And so for the rectus femoris, descent phase for low load, narrow stance was a 9.3, and it talks about all the units and everything, but just think about the number. 9.3, wide was 9.8, so it's very little difference in there. Ascent, low load, 12.8, wide was, or narrow stance was 12.8, wide was 12.3. But all the numbers are like that, where they're very, very close. There's not much deviation. The only ones that really seem to have where the gap was a lot bigger was the adductor longus and the gluteus maximus. Which, let me pull those up. Where did it go now? Yeah, I can't find it off the top of my head now in here. But I thought that was really interesting that the only two that really seem to show any drastic difference, basically. Well, here's the glute. So the gluteus, low load was pretty much the same on both. At 60%, you're not really getting that much more muscle activation one way or the other. Your recruitment doesn't have to be that great at 60% of max load. But with the high load, glute activation, studying on an EMG machine, so studying the actual muscle activation. Thought it was interesting that narrow stance had a 3.4 and wide had a 4.4. So that's a whole one difference. And then with the ascent phase, narrow stance had an 8.3 and wide stance had a 9.4. So you're going to get way more glute activation with a wide stance than you will with the narrow stance. And if I can find the adductor, I think it was similar with the adductor. Man, where did it go? But yeah, I think both of them were very, very similar like that. Well, here it's talking about it, but it says the IEMG values for the ascent phase were approximately 50% greater than those of the descent phase with use of the wide stance compared to approximately 20% greater when using the narrow stance. So when you're doing the wide stance with the when you're using a wide stance in squat, the adductors and the glutes are going to be firing a lot more, which I just think is really interesting because I've heard a lot of people talk about doing a wide stance or doing a narrow stance to get better quad activation or anything like that. But looking at these numbers here, there's not really much. There's slight deviation, but a lot of that, it's so small that a lot of it could be just because of the 9 individuals that they picked to do this. It's because of the group that they picked. That you're going to get those small differences. So with that, I wouldn't really give it any weight. But yeah, so apparently if you want to work your glutes more and your adductors more, looks like a wide stance is better than a narrow stance. But again, that's up to you. This is just more information. I just thought it was a really interesting review, decided to look it up, and when I found this study, decided to go ahead and share it with you. There's nothing really. It's not going to go super in depth, and especially based off of individuals. Individuals are going to have their own quirks that a single study is not going to show. So, but I thought it was interesting. So if you want to get those glutes hit more, it looks like probably doing a wide stance is better. But there you go. And that is about all for today. So just remember to please like and subscribe down below, and share this video with others that you think would be interested. So thank you. Have a good day. And remember to always improve that 1%.